Hello car lovers! Today I'm going to talk about a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I think nevertheless it should be talked about. I know here in the province of Quebec where I live, it is almost a taboo subject. Nobody talks about these things. We're going to talk about building wealth, and also building wealth is kind of like part of the car buying experience if you want. I'm 45 years old now, and I think I'm on my way on that path to building wealth. So therefore, I kind of feel that I have something to say on the matter, which you may find useful. These are certainly things I would have wanted to listen to and hear when I was much younger, let's say 20, 25 years old, perhaps 30 years old. So I'm going to do, the only reasonable thing is share that with you. These are general rules, and they're based on my life experience, books that I've read, and of course I will put them all in the description below, the titles and the videos that I've looked at. Some of them are not completely useful, but some of them you may find useful. So therefore you can go verify the validity of my statements. But I think the most important thing is I am somebody who preaches what I actually practice. So the tips that I'm going to give you, they're not tips I think you should do. They're tips that I did and I think have led to a certain amount of wealth creation, which will allow me to move on to do things that I like more somewhere in my 50s. That's a pretty reasonable achievement, I think. And well, here goes. So how do you go about learning how to build wealth? I think you should do that a little bit the way you would when you would want to lose weight, let's say, and you would go talk to people who have lost weight, right? Or who are fit. And you would ask them what behaviors they have. What are their eating habits? How do they manage to be fit? And you would go see fat people and you would go ask them, what are their behaviors? What are their eating habits? And that way you can make a list of things that perhaps you want to strive for and a list of pitfalls that you want to avoid. And I think that way you'll be able to achieve your objective. You'll be able to have an idea of how to get there, right? You'll be able to develop like a plan, right? It's like when you enter in Google Maps, you're going somewhere. Well, you have a destination in mind and Google gives you a plan, right? And so you know, it shows you how to get there. And when you don't, when you get confused, right, when you stray off course, well, Google corrects you, right, or Apple Maps or whatever. So that is, I think, the way I'll approach this. So here are top 10 things that I think you need to acquire wealth. I'm just going to make a definition here for wealth. I know a lot of financial planners or financial helpers. They refer to becoming a millionaire or becoming whatever. They have like a dollar figure. I'm gonna put my figure for wealth as the ability to stop working all the jobs you don't want to do and be able to do all the jobs or hobbies or activities or lack thereof activities for $0 a month and still be able to maintain a middle-class life standard. How's that? So that for me is the definition of wealth. That's somebody who's retired and doing well, basically. But you don't have to like not do anything when you're retired. You can decide to do whatever you want. You might decide to become a mechanic. You might decide to help poor people. So the number one thing about wealthy people is that they generally did not achieve wealth through inheritance. Now they may get inheritance along the way, but they had a plan and they were going to achieve wealth one way or another. And usually inheritance is just gravy. The point being is that it really has very little impact on people becoming wealthy. In fact, wealthy people tend to work very hard. So we're going to talk about people who they don't need to be supervised, right? When you assign them a task, they will do it very well whether they're being supervised or not. They're going to arrive on time. Basically, they have integrity. And when you're going to look at the habits of people who don't accumulate wealth, they tend to be people, not always, but often people who arrive a little bit late. Some people who need supervision, right? If you assign them a task, you have to watch, you have to do a follow-up. You're going to see if you're a low-level manager, this comes evident when you assign them things and they do it like that, and other people you assign things to them, you have to watch all the time, you have to correct. The bottom line is wealthy people tend to have a strong work ethic. Most people who become wealthy tend to achieve wealth in their late 40s. That's what the statistics say. And it's not an overnight thing. It's usually a result of decades of hard work. It takes a long time. So we may be led to believe otherwise. We're going to see sports stars, who are in their 20s driving a Lamborghini. We might see singers, Hollywood actresses who are living the high life, supermodels. We might see some tech geniuses making a lot of money. But generally, that is the exception to wealthy people. Most wealthy people get it over the long run. As an information, I'm probably going to get it somewhere in my mid-50s, I think, perhaps early 50s. So even though I'm a bit above or actually slower than the average, I'm getting there. So that's why I feel comfortable making that comment. Wealthy people tend to be people who learn, right? People who enjoy learning new things. And I must say, I kind of enjoy learning new things. And that can just be watching videos on YouTube. It could be browsing on the internet. It could be reading a book. It could be enjoying a conversation with somebody who's giving me rewarding information. Those are all things that people who become wealthy like to do. And in general, most wealthy people, though not all, tend to have a bachelor's degree or higher. All right, that's just what the statistics say. Well, I have a bachelor's degree. Now you're gonna say, Christopher, you have a really shitty bachelor's degree. You have a bachelor's degree in history. Yeah, you're right, I do. And I'm not sure how much that's worth. However, I am curious and I like to learn new stuff. Wealthy people tend to be allergic to debt, and people who are not wealthy have bad debt, right? They'll have credit card debt, lines of credit. Really, the only two types of debt that I find are acceptable are the car payment, and also it's going to be a mortgage, right? Or perhaps like an investment in a rental income, right? But there again, you have to be careful that you don't borrow too much. Many of the people who I know who have difficulty in their finances, a lot of them have credit card debt, a lot of them have margins of credit, a lot of them bought maybe too much house, right? They bought too much of a big house. I know in a place where I worked in this place where there was a lot of people making a lot of money, and sometimes, well, you know, it's kind of like molecules. You put them in a small environment and they bounce off each other, and sometimes they stick, right? So you would have couples that would form in the workplace. So you would have somebody making $120,000 a year and somebody making $140,000 a year get together. Now they have $260,000 a year. Well, one had a $200,000 condo, the other one had a $180,000 condo. So what did they do? They got married and they bought a $600,000 home. All right, it doesn't make sense. And they lived a little bit broke lives despite making a lot of money. The only way you can get into trouble is with debt, right? A smart person or even an average person, you can't get into trouble financially if you're not indebted. So just to tell you my story, I bought my first RSP for Americans, that's a 401k, when I was 20 years old. I hadn't even begun university yet. My last credit card debt was at 24 years old. My last non-mortgage, non-car debt was at 26 years old. I didn't borrow 1 penny for university because I had the good brains to know that a university degree in history was not worth very much. So it's not like I was studied engineering and I had this in the bag. That's probably the only time I would suggest perhaps student debt, but there are ways around it. If you're going to be studying something, a field that is not very good for in terms of your financial future, I certainly don't suggest that you become indebted for that. So the next thing is you should really focus after you've paid off your debt to have an emergency fund. And what is an emergency fund for? It's to prevent you from getting into debt again. Right? You usually develop 3 to 6 months expenses. So I'll give you an example. Let's say it costs you $2,000 a month to live. You should have between $6,000 and $12,000 in your bank account. That's the regular checkings account, right? That's where it should be. And I know that sounds like a lot, and I know a lot of Canadians may not be into savings and all that. What I find is the top-notch financial planners, which are usually from the United States, it's unanimity. There is a unanimity across that field. You have to have an emergency fund, and this will pay for emergencies. So what is an emergency? Well, let's say you get your tires changed in the spring and your mechanic tells you, well, in the fall, you're gonna have to come back because your brakes are gonna be due. That's not an emergency. So you have to ask your mechanic, how much will the brakes cost to be changed on my car in the fall? If he tells you $1,000, you have to save up $1,000 on top of your emergency fund to get your tires fixed. Let's say you have an aunt that dies and she lives out of state or out of province. Well, that is an emergency. You're going to go into your emergency fund, you're going to buy the plane ticket and take a few days off to go visit family. That's an emergency. Your fridge breaks. Well, instead of sweating it and worrying about putting it on your credit card, you take your money from your emergency fund, you take the $1,000 or $700 or $1,500 it costs, buy yourself a new fridge. That is an emergency. So things that are, I find a lot of people tend to use their emergency fund as kind of like a credit card that they borrow from themselves, like for costs that are predictable. You don't do that. The goal of the emergency fund is to prevent you from going back into that debt. The goal of the emergency fund is to allow you to continue saving, right? Later we're going to talk about savings. The next thing on the list is budgeting. Most wealthy people make budgets and have a really good idea of where the money's going. Most poor people or mediocre people do not budget. So I budget on my phone. I have an app. Here, and I use that to budget. Of course I do. Every month I enter what my revenue is, what I know my fixed costs are going to be, and enter what I think I'm going to be spending on, and that's the budget for the month. You can also do long-term budgeting, and that's a way to keep you motivated. So for example, if you save money every month, you can look at where you'll be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and that will motivate you to keep you saving, to keep you on the path of your financial objectives. And of course, the goal here is to prosper, right? That's all we want to do here is prosper. So I'm going to go on the lifestyle segment of this portion. The next thing is that most wealthy people spend less than they make, and most poor and mediocre people spend more than they make. Now that sounds evident. However, it really, I want to let that sink in for a minute. This ties into the next segment, in which most people who are wealthy do not live very blingy lives. I've gotten to know a lot of wealthy people. When I was younger, I did cycling, and cycling is a sport that's, for some reason I don't understand, tends to attract wealthy people. And I was always a little bit shocked at how low-key some of these rich people were. I remember my dad would tell me that guy is worth $4 or $5 million. And that guy was driving a 4-year-old Acura Legend. When he was standing among the other parents, you could not distinguish him from the crowd. And as I've researched this, I've noticed this to be more and more true. In fact, the top 3 jobs of wealthy people is engineer, accountant, and teacher, right? Numerically speaking. Now, there are others, there's entrepreneurs and all that, but if you take all the wealthy people, let's say in America, and you numerically, the top 3 wealthy people are those three jobs, and they're not very blingy. So this is what I mean by people who tend to live below their means. I am somebody who lives a little bit below my means. I mean, I love technology, right? Well, I can show you here right now, I have an iPhone XR. And there's been the iPhone 11, and there's been the iPhone 12, and I'm not going to buy it because this phone works very well, and I will change it. I bought it last year, by the way, not when it came out in 2018. So I keep my phone 2-3 years. My phone's 2-3 years. Even though I love my friends' OLED screens, I love it. It's just I tend to live below my means. I have an OLED TV, a 55-inch. The 65 inches came on special. I love a nice big television. No, I kept my 55-inch because I tend to like to live below my means. I'm earning this much, I spend this much. And not this much, not this much, this much. And the balance goes in savings. One of the biggest traps that mediocre people fall into is often the well-performing middle class. Let's characterize this as people make comfortable middle class, or $100,000 a year or more. For Americans, I guess that would be $80,000 a year or more. They're very much in what's called competitive consumption. And it's kind of like this game where you consume to compete with your peers in terms of the brands you have and what you own. And this is not like an anti-materialism rant. I love materialism. I think people should buy stuff, but it's just it does become a problem when you spend more than when you earn, or you're buying things not for your own personal fulfillment, but to one up others. And people tend to do those purchases in very visible ways. So for example, the home, the car, the clothes you wear, the travel you do, right? With social media now, it's very easy to brag about these things. Well, people will often I've seen people who should be doing very well in life, who are in fact maybe not doing that well because, well, they're spending a lot of money on things maybe that they shouldn't. They're spending more than they earn. All right, it's very difficult to brag about your emergency fund. It's very difficult to brag about that you're going to pay your mortgage of a reasonable home within 15 years instead of 30 years like your broke friends are. It's very difficult to brag about your retirement savings. I mean, these things are not easily evident. Well, guess what? The Audi is visible. You either have it or you don't, right? The new iPhone, you either have it or you don't. You're going to take out your phone sooner or later in the conversation. People are going to see it. The brand name clothes, you either have it or you don't. So this competitive consumerism, like I love cars, right? I really love cars and I spend tons of money in cars, but it's not because I'm competing with anybody. It's just because I like it. And I never bought a car that I couldn't afford. Try to look at it in terms of that, right? It has cost me a lot of wealth over the years, I must say, cars. I've cut on other things, right? But needless to say, it has delayed my wealth building. There's no question about it. But nevertheless, I think I made the broader point is that to live below your means a little bit. And I've given good examples. More nitty-gritty stuff in terms of characteristics I've noticed in wealthy people versus non-wealthy people is that wealthy people tend to be more proactive. And what does that mean, proactive? Proactive people are people who tend to, I'll give you an example. You perform a task, the person at the other end is not satisfied. A wealthy person will tend to seek feedback to improve themselves. And despite having often very big egos, they are not above harsh self-criticism and feeling down about that and getting back up again to do better next time. Whereas the poor or the mediocre will tend to let their pride get into the way of making a critical adjustment in the way they're behaving. For example, you should sell the car. It's killing you. Well, a rich person or a wealthy person will have the mindset to look at that decision and say, you know what? I'll drive a crappier car. It's going to feel bad for a little bit, and I'll make it up later down the road. Whereas the mediocre or poor person will hold on to that blingy car and not seek to take advice, and that person, he or she will let that purchase drag them down, become an anchor on their wealth, and therefore they will be mediocre or poor. So it's important, I think, often today I find there's a lot of a tendency to fall into the victim mindset. I mean, we've never been in a time of more prosperous wealth, of opportunity, and yet I cannot get over how many people think they're victims. I mean, really, in North America, you can't make it. It's almost impossible. You have to really try hard not to make it in North America. Wealthy people, their mindset is more often than not, is they don't take crazy risks. And what do I mean by that? Well, it could be simple. You could be a simple analogy to somebody who has a poor or mediocre mindset. So for example, a wealthy person, most wealthy people don't play the lottery because they know the odds. There's very, very little chance of return. Many poor people play the lottery, all right? And if you go, like I live in a lower income area, so when I go to the corner store, they're offering me a lotto ticket when I go gas up. When I go in a higher income area, when I go to one of my friend's house that lives in a nicer area, well, they don't even ask me, right? So it's kind of like that kind of, wealthy people tend not to take risks, and that will go for their investments. So what do I mean by that? Well, investing, they're going to invest in things, they're going to take calculated risk, they're going to take low risk options. So they're not going to go for the trendy stock. They're not going to go for Bitcoin. Many of them will avoid the stock market altogether and hire a professional in the form of a mutual fund or an index fund. These are people who worked hard for their money, and they won't throw it away easily. All right, they might save a little bit of money and play the stock market a little bit with a little bit of money, but they tend not to fall for that. They tend to be very, very risk averse, and they like to control the elements. So for example, a wealthy person may buy an apartment building and rent it out. And it's kind of like, that's not a risk, right? That's a calculated risk. I'm paying $400,000 for this apartment. It will generate $4,000 in rent every month. So you can make a decision about if that's enough money that it's going to make. And when you consider the repairs, potential repairs, clients who don't pay and all that. See the difference between playing the lottery and making this kind of risk, or betting on the trendy stock, hoping that market enthusiasm will make it go up? Yeah, sure, that might work. However, you're really betting on emotion, and you're not betting on the value of the investment in terms of its money earning power. So those are my guidelines for building wealth and my examples that I think should perhaps you may find interesting and may guide you as you're building wealth. I just want to talk a little bit about online financial planners and all online personal finance gurus. I find often when I'm watching them, they're kind of people who you pick their brain. And so, for example, I've watched one financial planner and picked their brain. I've watched another financial planner and picked their brain, and I've adjusted it to myself, right? And I think really it's about eliminating as much debt as possible and freeing up your income so that way you have the loose at the end of the month to save money on a consistent method. So let's say you're starting. How would I do it? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to obviously pay off all frivolous debt, credit cards, margins of credits. That has to go out the door, and you've got to work like an animal at it. You've got to fight like an animal. And that's the hardest part. And you've really got to sit down. You've got to take a budgeting app, and you're going to have to control your expenses. And you may have to take a second job, but you're just going to go at it like an animal. The top two places that people I find generally have uncontrolled costs is food, and it's going to be the car. So often I see a lot of people buying SUVs, and they should be buying compact cars because they don't have the money. I don't understand if you have a credit card debt or margin of credit and you're not going to the discount shopper like Walmart, or here in the province of Quebec where I live, Maxi, or I don't know, Price Shoppers in the United States, you're crazy. All right, you're crazy. Also, I find people eat out too much. I read a lot of things on the internet, and especially on official news sources that we live in, food deserts, and there's some people who don't have access to food. And of course, there was this non-profit organization or some social science study that showed that this area where I live is a food desert. Well, I can tell you right now, I got this. It's 3 kilometers away. It costs $2, and this is enough vegetables, frozen vegetables, for my entire week. All right? So make your own food and stop whining. Stop whining, all right? You have to stop believing everything you see on a Netflix documentary. Seriously, it's Netflix there. I mean, you have to use common sense, right? So there's vegetables I can eat for very, very little. So food and cars are really the two places. Like when I say food, I mean going out to the restaurant too and using those delivery apps, which add an incredible amount of money to that. So I would really stay away from those as much as possible. I'm not saying you don't go once in a while, but I'm just saying if you have credit card debt or a margin of credit, just forget it. Like, I mean, just plow through that stuff. You have to clear that off. Once that's done, once you've cleared off your debt, right, and you only have car debt and a house debt left, and you should be a small car, right, below your means, right? So if you make, let's say, $100,000 a year, your car should be worth maybe something about 30, 35, right? No more than that. And you should pay it off within 5 years. And if you're leasing it, it should be less than 4 years. Well, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to build up your emergency fund. And how do you build up your emergency fund? Well, it's simple. You save money, right? You make a budget and you cut more. So if you make, I don't know, if it costs you $3,000 a month to live, you're going to save and put aside at least $9,000. As you get older, you're going to increase that amount all the way to $18,000. It's just something that happens as you grow older. You just like to have a big emergency fund. I love my emergency fund. The next step, and this is the most critical, you have to save money. That sounds super simple. I've been saving money since I've been 20 years old, and that is my salvation. That is the reason why I will be wealthy in a few years. It's not because I went to school. It's not because of anything. It's because I saved money. And by saving something like $100 a week, or let's say $5,000 a year, that's not that much money. So if you make up to $50,000, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to save that amount of money. And if you save that amount of money for 40 years on an average return, and you'll see, I'll put it up right now, that you'll be worth $1 million. And in Canada, the Canadian government in 2009, the Conservative government came out with the most incredible savings instrument possible for the middle class. They came out with a tax-free savings account. And what that allows you to do is put aside $6,000 a year and invest it in almost anything you want. It could be a mutual fund, it can be whatever. Any financial instrument that you could use for your retirement, and you can just put it there, and any money it makes will be tax-free. That's incredible. The level of wealth that will generate for somebody, for a regular person that takes advantage of it, is truly incredible. If you make more than $50,000 a year, between the $50,000 to $100,000, you should really be saving $200 a week. And of course, you can add $100 a week every $50,000 you make. And that's a general guideline. Of course, some people tweak it differently, but I guarantee you, if you do that for 40 years, you're gonna be so far ahead of the game, it's not even funny. And of course, if you can save more, great, right? Once you're finished paying your house, you're probably gonna take that mortgage payment and put it on there, or take part of that mortgage payment and put it on there, whatever your plan is. Or if you're renting for cheap, you can save even more, right? Because your house is an appreciating asset. If you don't have a house and you're renting, well then maybe you should consider saving a little bit more, especially as your income increases. I want to talk a little bit, the final tip is I'm going to talk about the small hustles. What are the small hustles? One of the ways I've gotten ahead in life, and didn't get way ahead, but I just got ahead. I think I'm doing slightly better than average, is that every time I've made a little bit more money. So for example, let's say at work I was given a promotion and I made a little bit more money. Well, that extra money I would put towards my mortgage. Or if in 1 month I had more money left in my bank account, let's say I did my budget and I was supposed to have X amount in my bank account at the end of the month, and I had X plus $200. Well, I would take that $200 and I might spoil myself, or I might put it on my mortgage, right? And today with apps, it's so easy just to transfer money from one place to another. It doesn't cost anything. There's no service fee. That is awesome. You can really get ahead of the game. So you might be saying at the end of the day, you might save just 3 years for your mortgage, right? Well, 3 years, let me tell you, I'm 45 years old. 3, sometimes 4 years is huge, the difference. It's huge in terms of your quality of life. Imagine if today I had no mortgage, right? I'd be able to save thousands of dollars a month, literally, instead of what I actually save now. So those small hustles make a big difference. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you see sometimes when you get a first-person perspective of how it's done. I'm kind of a little bit jaded with these financial planners who do everything perfect, and it's just after a while, it's always the same story. So I kind of like to listen to like the regular people who are maybe not perfect. I'm maybe 75% financially perfect. And there's a tip that I learned once. This is probably like some parting wise words if you want. One of my girlfriends, many years ago, she went to something like Amway meetings. I'm not even sure what those are, but they were pretty big maybe 20 years ago. I'm Canadian, but this is really an American philosophy. And one of the speakers said, see, whether you do something today or you don't, next year will come. It will arrive. If you make no changes, if you don't decide to make a plan, if you don't decide to make an effort to improve yourself and to achieve prosperity or wealth, next year will happen no matter what you do. All right? And that is a prophetic statement. If you do not start, you will never start. And it's just that idea, get going. And it's kind of like, sometimes it may seem like a cow. It looks like a cow, right? So how do you eat a cow? How do you take out this cow? You sit down, you eat one small plate at a time, and you just gobble it up over the years. And that is how wealthy people think, and that is the path to wealth. And I've seen a lot of financial guru websites which say if you own a car, or if car ownership, they talk bad, always trashing car ownership. Well, it's too much car ownership that's bad, right? And that's what kills you. So this is a car review channel. If you enjoy car reviews, you can subscribe, and you can comment below if you have interesting comments. And that is it.